Hello everyone, my name is PK Raman and I'm the Chief Risk Officer of AMTD Digital. I'm very excited and very honored to meet and have a conversation with Dr. Dennis Khoo. He's a managing partner at All DIgitial Future LLP. He just recently published a book, Driving Digital Transformation, about his experience in building and running tomorrow a digital bank, the first Asian digital bank in Thailand and in Indonesia. Before running tomorrow, he had successful careers in Standard Chartered and in UOB, 20 plus years in running retail banking units. Welcome, Dennis, and a huge pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, PK.
By the way, I read the book, exciting book. It had so many nuggets of information. Even though I'm 20 years in this field, I found many exciting insights, and I hope we can share some of that with you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for first reading the book and for your compliments.
Why did you write this book? What prompted you to write this book? Who was it for? And what was your intention in writing this book? And does it compare with any other book that is there in the market?
Okay, that's a great opening question. First, I wrote the book for, at the peak we had 400 people working on this, both direct employees and contractors. And I think many of them did incredible work behind the scenes. Something like this, it's not just the work of a couple of people, it's the work of an army of people. And when I left to take chief responsibility for the bid for the wholesale bank license, COVID had already started. There wasn't a proper time to say thank you because you couldn't gather, right? Mm-hmm. So I think the book is really my tribute to the hundreds of people who are the real heroes that made Tomorrow by UOB possible. So that was the first objective. The second objective, of course, is that I found in doing and building the digital bank that actually is very tough, it's very hard. And therefore, when I looked at the statistics when I was writing the book, that the majority of digital transformations fail. Mm-hmm. I felt that perhaps I could make a small contribution to help the industry, to help any company that is making that transformation. And that's encapsulated in Chapter 5, the All DIgitial Future Playbook. Is really meant to increase the probability of success, and it's an amalgamation of all my learnings in the past 20 years. So those were the two chief reasons for writing the book.
Interesting. Some of us have this confusion between what's the difference between a bank that has got a digital proposition like a mobile banking or internet banking and a digital bank. Can you explain a bit?
Yeah. It's something that I think is still today, if you ask 10 people, you might get 10 different answers, right? And to me, I think the most distinguishing facet about it is that in a digital bank, you are targeting a very specific audience, usually a very digital savvy segment that will basically be prepared to do everything through the mobile. And that means that it is a return to a mono-channel world. And banking hasn't had a mono-channel world since the branch. Because if you think about it, right, every single channel we have created is mostly still around, right? The branch, the ATM, the CDM, the call center, internet banking, mobile app banking, right? You name it, everything's still around. So this is a very significant development because I think my prediction would be that in 20, perhaps no more than 20 years' time, the majority of people will be doing transactional banking on their mobile phones. And therefore, this is a very significant change. And if you take that into context with the fact that having a mono channel, having the new technology that is much more flexible, that is much cheaper, and you cobble that together with a very streamlined set of products, the focus on experience, you get basically an entity that will be able to produce very, very high experience and extremely low operating costs. And digital banking can't do that. Digital banking is simply another channel. And in fact, it adds to the cost because you're not going to remove the other channels. You're going to add one more channel for convenience. But the whole model is convenience at the expense of actually more infrastructure, more costs. So to me, a digital bank is very different because everything is geared towards experience at a lower and lower ongoing operating cost per customer.
Wow. Then it's very early in the book. You say out of the 6 P's that we learned, like people, process, price, promotion, and product, you said the only thing that is relevant is 1 P, which is process.
Yes.
In fact,
Yes.
even you said product doesn't matter any
Yes.
longer in the new world.
Yes.
Why do you say that?
Well, if you look at the traditional way that a bank would compete, right, there was the first P is people, right? In a digital bank, the people are designing the bank. They're not serving customers anymore. And I think sometime in the near future, chatbots will be so good. And we have proven actually that you can actually get a chatbot to front the entire experience and keep improving the experience, right? So people, I think, will fall by the wayside. Place is no longer needed, right? You don't go somewhere to bank anymore. You can bank anytime you want because you have the bank in your pocket. Product is commoditized, right? If you look at what especially consumer banks have been doing, they have really been playing with benefits. They've really been playing with price and promotion. And with so much liquidity, with interest rates, I mean, you get 30-year money at less than 1.9% today. So there's not a lot more to give, right? So you're not going to use a lot of pricing and promotional tactics anymore. So if you look at that, then the only P left is process, right? And process is the key for an experienced company. Process is the key if you're going to drive costs down. And unfortunately, that's not something in most banks' DNA. If you look where process is done in most banks, it's at the bottom 1/3 of the organization. And you can't become an experienced company, you cannot drive costs down if you don't have a relentless focus on detail and process. And that is the tough change that is coming for most banks. And if you relate that to the fact that actually so few banks have very high net promoter score, one of the reasons is because they are not focused on process.
Any good example of a company that is focused only on process that has been successful?
Well, my favorite example actually, and might surprise most people, is actually Apple. Right? Apple is I would say, the premier experienced company in technology. But if you know about Apple, Apple is a company that is extremely process-oriented, design-oriented, and detail-oriented. And I describe in my book one of the examples, right? If anyone listening to this podcast has an iPhone, if you turn on the iPhone, you will find that the touch on the iPhone, you'll find that the button on the phone actually moves up and down. How better an example can you give for someone who's so detail-oriented? So Apple, I think, is a very good example of the amount of detail, the amount of process that goes into designing an experience that, from end to end is simply, incredible.
Yeah. Well, many people will say Apple is a product company, but actually you're saying it's a process that's driving the product.
Well, Apple, to me, is an experience company because it doesn't implement technologies just because the technology is there.
Agreed.
It implements the technology when it thinks that it can add to the experience. And experience is the key. And Apple is first a design company. You design the product and then you put all the gear into it. And you have to stuff it into what the designers have done and not the other way around. If it's the other way around, then you're an engineering company.
Okay. I mean, for us, I've been in legacy banks, and you say that for legacy banks to transform to a digital bank, culture and organization setup are big barriers. What do you say so, and what can be done to actually change those?
Well, first we have to look at the context of banking, right? Banking is unlike any other industry in the world. it is so critical, so important that every single country regulates their banks locally. So in the first place, it's more of a local business than a global business. And because it's so important, and banks therefore have to manage risk very well, right? Because if you think about it, the money that's placed in the bank is lent out. So, it's not, all of it is not there. So it's based on trust, right? And that trust is based on managing risk well. Because if you don't manage risk well, then, what's going to happen to the money that's placed in trust with the banks? So if you understand, therefore, the origins and the importance and therefore the focus on risk, it therefore is basically an organization that's more risk averse, right? It's trying not to make so many changes because with more changes, you introduce more risk. And if that's the case, then if you couple that with the fact that there is, in a sense, a little bit of a disdain to focus on the detail and the process, right, at the very top, this makes for a very difficult transition to a world where experience and the cost of delivering experience is the only thing left, right? There isn't really very big fundamental technology changes in banking. Probably the last big invention was distributed ledger technology, and before that, nobody can remember, what it was. And so it's not really a very big technology play. I would say, and I describe that in the book, that if you want to do digital bank well, you need three things, right? You need to design it very well, and then you need to really process and focus on really process to the nth degree. And once you do those two things, then the technology piece will fall into place well. But if you don't do those two first pieces properly, nothing that technology can do to save the program.
Mm-hmm. The other thing, not surprisingly, you use a very good quote saying data should be elevated to the same level as capital in a traditional bank. And so, why do you say that? To elevate data as important as capital, how does that play a part in running a successful digital bank?
So the premise for that is my belief that digital banks are going to differentiate based on three things. The first is really the ND to play, right? And that's building a transactional experience so good that your customers feel that, banking should always have been this way. That's the ND to play, because if you don't do that, if you don't produce a high net promoter score transactional banking, nobody's going to bank with you. They will feel that, it's the same or worse than the bank I already have. Once you achieve that, then service is the next frontier, because there are still a lot of service issues in banking. If you talk to banking customers, they will inevitably say that, I have to repeat the problem several times, for a very simple request, and that there isn't a proper follow-up. So if you get the whole service ethos correct, that would be a clear delighter for your customer. But once the best banks, the best digital banks get these two elements correct, then the final battle will really be the use of data. The use of data to be proactive, to be able to predict a problem even before it happens, right? And give a very simple example that most of your audience would be familiar with. You might have a few accounts. One of those accounts may have a low balance, and you have an incoming payment. This is all known, right, to the bank. But sometimes a bank would let that payment bounce, right? And then you have to do all that remediation action, right, to go back and remediate that transaction, when actually all they need to do is alert you that, the transaction is coming, usually comes at this time of the month. Would you like to transfer some funds from another account to take care of it? So you can see from this very simple example how data is critical. And data hasn't really been, especially transactional data, hasn't been seen in that light, right? Traditionally, it is in a statement, right? It's for you to check, and then it is archived, right? So I think the big change going forward is that digital banks need to be masters of data, because it is the final frontier in differentiation. It's how the people who have become very good in the experience around transactional banking in service, this this top tier of competitors are going to differentiate from the way they use data to make banking even more proactive. And I kind of look at this as that part of banking that's invisible, right? It's behind the scenes, but it's also the part that you can be proactive, right? And you can really add value in what is traditionally something that's a very commoditized service. And that's why going forward, as banks think about how they need to design and roll out their digital banks, data need to be elevated to the same level of importance as capital is now. Because capital, all bankers would know, is the very essence of how you manage risk, right? How you manage the amount of capital, the quality of capital, and of course associated with that, all the necessary buffers for loss that need to be factored in.
I mean, there's wonderful chapters. One of the chapters on leadership. You said you call it paradoxical traits. You need to be agile at some times, but you need to be deliberative at other side. How easy it is to identify leaders with this kind of duality of traits, and what was your experience in trying to hire people?
One of the interesting things is that this, what I call yin and yang traits, right? They actually make leaders more balanced. And balanced leaders are more considered. And consideration is one of the keys to increasing your probability of success. Right? If you look at the methodology that is described in chapter 5 of the book, it really talks about having 4 dimensions: customers, business, capabilities, people, and leadership. Sounds very simple. But at the next level down, it basically expands to 19 different elements. And those 19 different elements have 56 different considerations. So we are looking for balance because balance leads to better consideration and therefore leads to higher success when you have something very complicated. And it would have been very difficult to do this without the right instrument. And it just so happens that there is such an instrument in the market, and that's called the Harrison Assessment, which I was trained on. And I find that it's a very good tool to allow you to assess how balanced someone is. And I'll give a simple example to kind of cap off this question. In a startup, you need 2 essential qualities in an organization. You need someone to be flexible because things are changing all the time. The startup is learning and doing things for the first time. So initial assumptions, hypotheses, of course, might be wrong and you have to change. But if the team is extremely flexible and not organized, they will add to more chaos because they simply cannot remember, there's no process. They don't attempt to look at methods of working. And methods of working help the organization be more productive, be more structured, be more repeatable in their success. So then having both flexibility and the ability to be organized are crucial traits that are very key to the success of an organization that is in startup mode.